Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 71. Happy New Year to you! We've started a whole new chapter this week, a whole new year of possibilities. I'm excited for what's to come in 2022. I've got some plans because I think it's nice to have a little bit of structure, but also I try not to hold on to any ideas about how things are going to unfold because you never know what's going to come. I looked at my whiteboard in my workroom where I wrote my professional goals for last year, and I realized that I didn't do a single one of the things that were on my list. And yet I was really happy with how the year went because I reached a lot of things that I hadn't planned for, and it felt wonderful to achieve them. So let's step into this new year and see what's to come. I'm very excited about sharing today's interview with you. I'm speaking with naturalist, writer, and photographer Kelly Brenner. Kelly has written an incredible book called Nature Obscura, a city's hidden natural world. And in the book, she explores her home city of Seattle, Washington, with the deep curiosity of a naturalist. I loved this book. Each chapter takes us into a new domain, exploring a new species or habitat within the city. In our conversation, Kelly recounts some stories about the incredible wildlife she shares her city with, as well as ways we can all become backyard naturalists wherever we are. Let's listen. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. I am very, very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
I always start off going back, and I'm wondering if you could tell me about your connection to nature as a child. Did you have this nature connection with you from the beginning?
Yes, definitely. As David Attenborough says, when somebody asks him when did he gain his sense of, connection to nature, he always says, well, whenever did you lose it?
Yeah.
So, kids are inherently interested in nature. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a small town, but we spent our summers up in the Columbia River Gorge and way up in the mountains. And so we spent all my childhood, chasing after lizards and salamanders and bugs and things like that. So yeah, I've been lucky that it's always been there and I never lost it. So I've been able to retain it throughout my life.
That's wonderful. And so then you grew up and you studied landscape architecture. And I'm interested to know about the progression from studying landscape architecture and how your career progressed from there to being now an urban naturalist and nature writer.
Well, I ended up somehow in marketing, and I knew that definitely wasn't for me. And so I went back to school, and first I got into the community college doing landscape design, and I decided I wanted to go further in that. So I started working towards a degree in landscape architecture. And during that degree, I took several classes in ecology, and I learned a lot about, designing habitat, but how things are connected, and you can't just design say I want butterflies here. It's like a huge complicated ecosystem.
Yes.
So there's so many components to it. And so I started focusing more and more on how to integrate nature into the cities where a lot of it's been wiped out or degraded or sterilized. And so I really had this big interest in even then connecting people to nature in the cities. And so when I graduated, the economy had tanked. That was 2009. And so I started writing a website about those concepts and habitat design and things like that. And I just kept writing. And eventually I just started writing and gave up on the whole career of design, which worked out. So here I am.
Here you are. And you've published this amazing book, Nature Obscura. I loved the book. I can't tell you. It's such a wonderful exploration. It's all about the nature you experience in your home city, Seattle. And first, I'd love for you to describe the title of the book, Nature Obscura. It's a reference to camera obscura. I'd love for you to talk about that.
So I always think that it's hard to read sometimes nature writing because it's that person's exploration, and it's
Yes.
often hard to understand if you haven't experienced it yourself. And so I always think that nature, especially nature writing, is like a camera obscura. So a camera obscura, it takes an image, like it's a live image. So it's just like this old fashioned camera that rotates. And the one I saw was on Cairngorm Mountain in Scotland,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was rotating on the top of the mountain, and it was reflecting in this completely pitch black room on this round circular table the image of the mountain. And that made
Wow.
me think that's like nature writing. So it's like I was outside experiencing the mountains firsthand, but then I came back in to that room and I saw the camera projecting it onto the flat surface, and it's like a whole different perspective, and it's representative of, you know, the real nature outside, but it's just kind of that weird dynamic of perspectives. And so that's kind of where I got the idea of nature obscura, how it's a reflection of my experiences onto paper, onto a flat surface, but something that people can read and, you know, take to their own experiences and go out and have their own time outside.
Mm. Tell me about that, about translating something so three-dimensional into words on a page. Your whole experience is like multi-sensory. You've
Mm-hmm.
got everything going on at once. How do you distill it down?
It's, I think my landscape architecture training really helped with that, because you have to focus on the big picture, but then you have to narrow it down and focus on the
Mm.
tiny little, like either a piece of land or one little piece of it. So learning how to break it down and see the tiny tardigrade that's microscopic in the moss on the roof in the city,
Yes.
you know, it's all connected. um, and I think it just takes a lot of practice and a lot of perspectives, thinking about the tree, and not only in space but in time,
Mm.
because trees, I mean, live for hundreds of years, and so we have a hard time, like that tree is just, it's just, we take it for granted, but it's changing just like everything else. um, and so the more we think about it, the more we investigate those different perspectives, the tiny, the big, the long lived, the short lived. So I mean, some flies only live for a few days. So
Yeah.
I think once you like just dip into little pieces at a time, it starts to build a bigger picture.
Yeah. When I was reading the book, I thought Kelly is a professional noticer. It just kept on coming into my mind. That's your job, notice things. And the book is all about the things that we might not notice in the city that are going on around us. Things like that you might not even know are happening. And you draw our attention to that, like fungi turning ants into zombies and things like that. So a professional noticer notices these things. And and in the book you explore a lot of different environments. You're lucky your city has amazing diversity of natural spaces. You have the coast, you have city parks, you have the lake. I'd love for you to talk about these different environments and how you're finding diversity here.
It's interesting because Seattle, as with all cities, have changed dramatically. I mean, if you look at historic pictures, it was all forested, and the landscape has been so dramatically altered. And a lot of my early explorations were in the very, very urban center where I lived. I've moved now to slightly further out, but still in the city. Um, and like I took a lichen class, and our we studied lichens in a cemetery. So I started to learn these little nooks that people wouldn't
Mm,
think of as habitat, but that are tucked away, like that can't be touched, like cemeteries, rooftops. There's a bird here that's called a nighthawk, and they used to nest on rooftops a lot. Now they're hardly ever in the cities, but that was because the rooftops used to be constructed with gravel, and that was a perfect
okay.
habitat for the nighthawk. And then we changed the construction, so now they don't nest here anymore. Um, but there's all these little nooks and crannies that the peregrine falcons nest on the bridges, because it's a perfect replica of a cliff. And so
Mm, of
with
course.
our construction of cities, we've destroyed things, but we've also created new habitat that is like in the cemeteries. Those tombstones are kind of a replicant of the rocks that would have been in a clearing in a natural
Mm.
setting. So we've recreated a lot of these different habitats, and even though they're man-made and reconstructed, um, there's still a lot to investigate there. But yeah, as you said, we're lucky here in Seattle. We have, unfortunately, most original landscape is destroyed, but we still have a couple parks that have the little. I mean, it seems big now, but it's a pathetic little remnant of the old growth forest.
Okay.
And almost all the seashore has been altered by seawalls and stuff, but we still have little pockets of habitat. And I always think it's funny when people say that Seattle is so rich in natural history, but that that shows that our perspective has changed. Well, not really
Yeah.
changed. That's just our perspective. That wow, look at all this great stuff we have. But then that's normal. All those seawalls are normal. All the lack of seashore is normal to us now, and we fail to see what it used to be like. So writing the book was actually a little bit depressing. Okay, a lot depressing.
Yeah.
Knowing what it was like, all the wetlands that used to be here, all the natural seashore that used to be here, which is now very far and few between.
It made me smile when you said that you mark in your calendar the lowest tides of the year to be sure not to miss a tide pooling opportunity. So tide pools, in particular nudibranchs and creatures in the tide pools, are very dear to your heart. Can you talk about the amazing things in your tide pools?
In fact, tonight I'm going tonight. So winter, we have night tides that are low.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm going actually tonight and tomorrow night to look for nudibranchs. I think tonight's at 10:30 at night, and then
wow.
Sunday night is at 11:30 at night. So I'll be out there like with the headlamp on and my flashlights and everything and my chest waders. And the best place I found for nudibranchs, very funnily, speaking of weird habitats, is under a ferry dock.
Okay.
For some reason, this it's just a normal beachy area, but it's under the ferry dock, and there are sea pens that grow there, and I haven't seen them grow anywhere else around the area. And so there's a huge diversity of nudibranchs because they eat the sea pens.
Okay.
And because of the pillars, they create some sort of microhabitat. I don't understand all the connections yet, but this weird area underneath the ferry dock is where I'll be going tonight in the cold rain.
That is commitment. 11 p.m. walking around in your waders in the night with a headlamp. That's commitment to science. I love it. So one of the things that really came through is that, you talked about fragmented landscapes and the way we've altered things, but one very big group of animals that live on and thrive are invertebrates, and such a diversity of invertebrates in the city. And some of them really struck me, and you were talking about diversity of things you might not think about, like diptera, like flies. And it reminded me of something that happened to me recently. I was nature journaling, and we noticed that there was a little nest on a low branch, and we were very excited to see this nest. And then the next day we had a massive storm, and we came out after the storm, and there were two little chicks that had died and fallen from the nest. And so I usually put lovely things in my nature journal, flowers and butterflies and stuff. And I thought, no, this is nature. We need to recognize the cycle of this. So I put these two little dead chicks in my nature journal. But the thing that struck me about that while I was doing it was the flies that were visiting these two little dead bodies. There was at least 6 different species of fly there. And it's something that I'd never thought about. You just think a fly, it's something that we don't focus on. But having that moment with these two little dead birds and all this diversity of flies really struck me. I'd love to hear that from you about diversity of things we don't usually think about.
I'm a huge fan of invertebrates. In fact, I'm a little bit anti-mammal because they get so much attention, and invertebrates are so vastly looked over. But I love the invertebrates, the bugs, all the creatures in the tide pools, and I mean all the weird stuff. Not like the big megafauna, like the sea stars. That was like, oh, a sea star. I'm like, but look at all this really weird tunicate. It's a sea squirt. I mean, they're just so interesting. And there's so much opportunity because, for one, what is 97% of all life on Earth or all animal life on Earth are invertebrates.
Yeah.
And most of them haven't been identified. Like, you could be holding in your hand a species that's completely new to science that nobody's ever described before. You could identify, I mean, like for nudibranchs, for example, everybody knows about them. Well, not everybody, but they're very glamorous and really photogenic, and people love nudibranchs. But today still we have very little idea of what they actually eat.
Mm.
A lot of them are very host or species dependent, like they'll only eat one species of sponge, and they're really bad in captivity because we don't know what they eat. So we can't
Interesting.
keep them in aquariums because like, well, we don't know what they eat.
Wow.
And so there's still so much to learn about invertebrates, and not only to mention that we new species. Like if you became an expert in flies, you could probably identify and name new species.
Yes.
And they're just like yeah, huge diversity. Like if you go somewhere in the city, you're not probably going to find bears and
Mhm.
cougars and all the big megafauna, but you are going to find flies or insects you've never even heard of. I mean, I'm still encountering new things and I'm doing
Yeah.
this all the time. And I still find things that I don't even know what that is. So there's just so much wonder and sense of discovery. And I mean, we're not going to all be, explorers traveling the world anymore, but you can in your own backyard. It's like there's a
Yeah.
whole world of discovery and so much opportunity.
Yeah, that is so exciting. And so, as part of this exploration, you have your tools, microscopes. You have two microscopes and you go between them, a dissecting microscope, and then you move to the compounding
Mhm.
microscope. Tell me about this, about looking at nature in with these tools to help you.
It started with just a simple hand lens, which is
Mm-hmm.
like it's a hand loop, so it's like what jewelers use, and it's the simplest little tool that you can fit in your pocket. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, okay, I'll get that, and you get it, and it literally changes your world
Yes, yes.
because like looking at lichens under the hand lens,
Mm.
or insects, or I mean anything. It's just it's like literally opens a whole new window to a whole new world. And of course, once you start down that path, then you have to get a microscope.
Yes.
So I got the dissecting microscope because that's better for insects and lichens, and I was learning to identify lichens and stuff. And then I got down that route, and then I'm like, well, now I have to get the compound microscope so I can see, tardigrades up close, and cells and spores, and but it's like my favoriteest thing. I'm writing this new book now about naturalist activities, and
Mm.
just like the simplest tools make the biggest difference. My other favorite tool is a very simple flashlight.
Okay.
And if I go out to the forest to look for slime molds, which I do quite a lot, they're tiny, but they're very colorful. But they grow on rotting wood and stuff. And if you just look at it, you'd be like, there's nothing here. But if you get that little flashlight, just a flashlight, nothing special, and you shine it on that wood, it's just mind blowing how much more you can see. And it just seems like so simple. It's just a flashlight, but it
Yes.
changes and it makes so much more visible. It's like the hand lens and the flashlight, and just those always in my bag. I always take them with me.
Yes.
They're my favorite tools, and they're simple and cheap and easy to use.
Yeah, something that everybody could access if they wanted
Hmm.
to bring this into their own lives. You mentioned about tardigrades, and I have to talk to you about them because they are amazing. And my young son and I have tried to find them. Maybe don't have the right tools, but I'd love for you to speak about these amazing little creatures that you can find on your roof and in moss and all these amazing little nooks and crannies that you might not think about.
It's funny when I started reading about them, I thought, well, that's exotic. I mean, they go to
Yeah.
space. They're super durable, and so I don't know why, but I was just so shocked to find them on my roof. Like I climbed up through the skylight and I hung out there and I plucked off the moss that's growing on the roof. And like it's nuts. There's so many tardigrades. And so now I'm looking at my garage roof. I'm like, oh, look how much moss is on there. There's got to be like billions of tardigrades. And as the moss grows, I get happier and happier. I'm like, it's gonna cover
Yes.
the whole
Well,
roof
a lot
soon.
of people try to get rid of the moss, don't they?
Right.
And you're the opposite. You're like, yeah, habitat for tardigrades.
Every time I see somebody move in and they scrape off the moss and then
Mm-mm.
sprinkle the powder on it to prevent it growing, I'm like, that's the
What are
saddest
you
thing ever.
doing?
You're gonna have no tardigrades now.
Maybe we should go back and explain exactly what tardigrades are for the listener who might not know.
Tardigrades are one of the coolest invertebrates. So they're
Yeah.
microscopic, and their other name is they have a name called moss piglet and then water bear, and they look like these pudgy naked bears, but they have eight
Yeah.
legs with little, well, kind of long claws, and this funky little face that has it's called a stylus, so it has like this weird suctiony face. but they're adorable, and they're super durable. They've gone up to space and been exposed to the space vacuum and like hundreds and hundreds of degrees and negative hundreds of degrees, and what they do is they turn into a ton, as TUN, and they just kind of shrink in on themselves and they kind of desiccate. And in that state of suspended animation, they can basically survive anything. Not all of them. There's a whole lot of species, and only a few can do that superstar survival. But yeah, but there's like no other creatures that can survive all those things. And yeah, I mean, we think cockroaches are going to survive the end of the world, but it's going to be tardigrades.
Yes, yes. They're so astonishing when you first see a picture of them. That I remember the first time I saw a picture of a tardigrade, and I did a double take, like, well, hang on, what? There's lots of weird and wonderful things in the world, but hang on.
I mean, it's like the best sci-fi authors or illustrators
Yes.
could come up with something like that, but they're like right up on my roof.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's amazing about nature. It's just out of this world. Yeah, I hope to see one with my son one day. We'll get we'll get a more powerful microscope and see what we can find. I'm wondering, so one of my guests, her name is Ivea Moore, and she's a botanist working in restoration. And she's spent many years getting close to her habitats, and she said it would be impossible for her to leave her city now because she's so close to it. She's developed this exchange relationship with nature. And I'm wondering about that for you. Do you think it would be impossible for you to leave Seattle now that you know it and love it so well?
I I ask myself that all the time because my other very favorite place in the world is Finland,
Really?
and I've traveled there a number of times and spent some time, well, a lot of time out in the parks and then wandering around in nature and stuff. And I love it so much. But
Mm.
then they don't have the shores and the nudibranchs, so it's like I need the best of both worlds. So I'm like, how can I spend time in each place? But I also want to
Yeah.
visit new places because the more I learn, the more I research and write about, the more now I really want to go to Japan because they're huge into nudibranchs and they have
Oh, wow.
really amazing nudibranchs just off the like just by Tokyo. So it's just a never ending cycle of
Yes.
we're lucky here because we have mountains and ocean. It's hard to find another place that has that sort of diversity. And we have, I mean, the valley and which is such a diversity of habitat. But I never want to stop exploring. I want to
Mm,
keep, experiencing new.
mm.
And another thing about going to new places is you can compare. It's really good to learn about other places and landscapes and birds and whatever, because that gives you a whole new perspective on what you live with.
Yeah,
So
that's so true. Mm. Tell me about the year-long nature exploration challenge you set for yourself.
so my daughter, I put her into a preschool, but it wasn't an everyday preschool. It was a preschool, a forest preschool.
Okay.
So she was entirely outside, and it was at the arboretum. And so, and it was only like 4 hours, so it wasn't really worth. It was just not worth the time for me to take her to school, go home, and then come
Yes.
back and pick her up. So I thought, well, I'm just going to stay here in the arboretum. And I started wandering around, and then like, well, there's so much to see, and then the year changes and everything. So I decided that I was going to like spend my time documenting everything that I could. So then I turned it into a year long challenge while she was at school. Um, I would go explore and find different nature things to look at, and it was challenging because I mean, there's only so much. Yes, there's lots of nature. There's only so much you can really observe every day of the week,
Mm,
every day of the year.
mm.
So it challenged me to look beyond, like, okay, well, here's tree bark again. But then I started looking closer. I'm like, oh, here's a weird spider web in the tree bark. I wonder what that spider's doing. Oh, here's something growing on it. I don't even know what it is. So I'm going to take it home and try and figure out what this thing is, and discover liverworts and all kinds of different things. So it's a really good challenge for making myself look even closer at things that I would otherwise completely overlook. And I'm sure I still do. I mean, there's just too much to see. It's just overwhelming. So picking one thing at a time and kind of really focusing on it each day was enlightening. It was really enlightening, and I think it helped train me to do even more observation.
Yeah, certainly. And during that year, you came across a delightfully named organism called dog vomit slime mold. And it took you down this whole path of discovering slime molds. Can you talk about slime molds and what they are, and also this amazing woman scientist, Juliana Lister, that you came across?
So after nudibranchs, slime molds are my other very favoriteest thing. And I know like scientists find their one thing that they do. I
Mm.
can't do that because I like everything is so interesting. But at the same time, I have these things that I really, really love and I love forever. And slime molds are so, I mean, vastly overlooked. Nobody knows what they are. They have a really gross name. they they're they're unrelated to anything else. So they got bounced back and forth. At first, people thought they were animal because they move. They don't
Mhm.
grow like out from a base. They actually move and travel. But then people thought, no, they're more plant-like, so they're plants. No, they're lichens. No, they're mosses. They kind of got bounced around, but now they're like completely independent. They're kind of their own little
Wow.
kingdom of. They act a lot like fungi. They are decomposers, so they you'll find them on rotting and dead material, mostly wood and leaves and things like that. Um, and superficially, they grow like mushrooms. They kind of have a it's similar to mycelium, but it kind of these tendrils grow across the wood or whatever. And then when they mature, they grow these mature forms of either they're like orbs on the wood, or they have like little stalks with orbs, and inside of those are the spores, and then they release out into the air and start all over again. But but unlike mushrooms, they're very well, not always, but they're very colorful. Sometimes
Mm.
they're iridescent, sometimes they're bright pink or um, bright yellow or orange, and they're really small. Some of them are almost microscopic. It takes a huge amount of effort to find them. Some are more easy to see, but there's almost nobody that studies them
Mm.
even today because they don't do anything for humans. Like we don't eat them.
Yes.
They don't offer any benefits to us. They're just there. So there's no funding in that for scientists. So
Mm-mm-mm.
there's not a lot of people that study slime molds. But so yeah, in my research, I kept coming across Miss Lister. She was commonly called Miss Lister. She was very respectful. She was British, and she was a naturalist, and wrote some books and illustrated about trees. And she was a birder, and but her father discovered slime molds. I don't know how, but she started studying them with him. And these are amateurs, mind you. They're just naturalists. They're not professional scientists, but they were like soon the leading experts in the world on slime molds, and they wrote a book. And the actual scientist at the museum at that time was a bit put off because he'd done his own book, but theirs was better. And so there was a bit of a jealousy going on there. But Miss Lister corresponded with the Emperor of Japan, who had an interest in slime molds, and I came across some of her specimens in Vancouver, BC, and in the university library here in Seattle, I found a book that she had gifted to somebody, like just randomly. So, I mean, she was all over it. And what I really liked about her, one, was that she was not a professional, what we would think
Mhm,
of, as
mhm.
a professional scientist, but she made a huge difference in the slime mold world. And second, well, and her father too, but they thought that science like that should be shared widely. It shouldn't be sat on, it shouldn't be hoarded. And so they corresponded with people all over the world, and they sent them their samples, and they received samples in return. And it was just a very open, welcoming pair that they just, and I love that because that's not very common anymore. It probably
Yes.
wasn't then either, but usually, science is, you think about the ivory tower, and it's very exclusive, and it's not open. So they were very special in that, and I really like that. And she was one of the first um, women into the Linnaean Society, and so yeah, she was, and she's pretty much unknown now. So it's kind of fun to get to know her a bit.
Yeah, I love when people unearth these stories of like really interesting trailblazers, and especially that she must have been, science, especially back then, was probably very male dominated, and here she is making a mark, writing a book as an amateur, not as a professional, but then sharing that and exposing these amazing creatures to the world. I love that story. I love that chapter. It makes me think. So, I'm thinking about amateur naturalists and citizen scientists. But I have a friend in Canada, and in Canada, they're trying to change this term, citizen science, to
Mm-hmm.
community science to be more inclusive. And I think that's lovely. So I just wanted to say that. But yeah, citizen science, community science has a really big place in the city, right? I'd love to hear you speak about that.
Yeah, and I think so. I'm writing this new book about being a naturalist, and I think my stance is that if you study nature and whether you share it or not, I think you're a naturalist.
Yes.
And I don't I don't think that it has to have any wider connection to other than because if I was the last person on earth, I'd still be doing this and I'd still call myself a
Yes.
naturalist. Um, but sharing it is also very good, as we see, with Miss Lister. But yeah, it's hard because the community science, there's limited doors.
Mm.
I mean, we have the apps like iNaturalist and things like that, which are used, but and then there's local groups. But I think the whole thing of like a naturalist is kind of overlooked anymore.
Mm.
People just want to do specific projects, like do a bio blitz for this location, or
Yes.
everybody look for this specific organism throughout the region. It's very project driven, and it's not often it's not communal anymore. There's no wider community. I mean, even with the days of social media now, I think there's still a
Mm.
lack of those clubs that used to exist back in
Yes.
the early naturalist days. Of you didn't have to be a scientist, and now it's very science scientist driven. Like this is what
Mm-hmm.
we're going to do. So there's not a lot of room for the naturalists to um, make their mark, or
Mm-hmm.
even study something, because especially with like getting permits and getting approval to do things. And yeah, it's just a very convoluted world now.
Mm-mm. What you said about being a naturalist when you're studying nature, you don't need any grand degree or you don't need anything. You just need to study nature. That just reminded me of my own father, who is very much a naturalist, and he has his own microscope and he has his own way of just looking at mold on his bread, or finding something interesting in the compost bin and bringing it up and growing it, or hatching eggs that he's found. And that idea that you can be fascinated by nature through your whole lifetime, and quietly in your own home study it in this way and learn about it is, yeah, I love it. I love what my dad does, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I think there doesn't have to be an end goal. I mean, just curiosity on its own. I
Yes.
mean, can you imagine David Attenborough just like, well, I'm only going to do this if I can make programs? I mean,
Yes.
it's just part of him. He wouldn't stop doing it no matter what.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a part of who you want to be. I mean, anybody could do it.
Yes. Yeah. So my next question, you touched on this a little bit already. I'm thinking about looking at nature in a cityscape. You see lots of different fragmented landscapes, introduced species, species loss, and you mentioned that about the sort of feeling that comes when you realize this, when you're studying it for the book. There's also, I'm interested also in nature's incredible resilience and adaptability, and adapting to the changing conditions that we keep throwing at it. And in particular, I'm thinking about this astonishingly quick evolution of the sticklebacks that you documented um, in response to the pollution in Lake Washington. And I'd love for you to talk about that, about nature's resilience and the way adaptation is happening, and the way that nature just keeps going, keeps changing to whatever we throw at it.
And I love how scrappy some of these species are. like the muskrats are like, well, we don't have any more banks, so we're just going to go ahead and borrow your boat exhaust.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
ingenious, and there's just like their behavioral adaptations. Like, okay, well, you took this away from us, so we're gonna go ahead and do this.
Yeah.
But then there's like the evolutionary changes, like the stickleback. I always think it's funny. Like along the lake, we have a lot of grass, people for picnicking or hanging out or whatever, and that is the absolute ideal habitat for the Canada goose.
Okay.
And the Canada goose, they eat grass, they poo. They eat grass, they poo. And people don't like the mess on the grass. Um, and so it's like, okay, but we've taken away their habitat.
Yeah.
We've given them this perfect alternative habitat, and now we're upset because they're using it.
Yeah.
And they've adapted perfectly to what we've given them, and we can't complain about it. But there's so many species that are just like, okay, well, we're just going to go ahead and do this now, and then sometimes it works with us, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But then you get into the evolutionary changes, like the stickleback, which they have. Sometimes they have plate armor, sometimes they don't, and they lost it because they didn't need it. And then because of the murk, and the lake was so disgusting. It was like all the sewage was dumped into it. And this is a big lake. Like, it could take you an hour to drive around it, or several hours to bike around it. So it's like a number of cities, like 5 or 6 cities border it. So it's not a small lake. And it was just full of sewage. It was disgusting. The visibility was bad. And so the sticklebacks are like, we don't need armor anymore. Nobody can eat us because they can't find us. And then when they finally started clearing the lake out, they stopped the sewage. They, made proper sewage plans. And the stickleback's like, whoa, now we can be eaten again. That's not good for us. So they decided to grow. Well, they didn't decide. They grew the armor back. So they actually underwent reverse evolution.
Yeah.
After losing the plates in the first place, all in response to our dumping sewage into the lake.
It's depressing, but it's also astonishing, like that they can adapt in such a short time. Very, very small number of years in terms of evolutionary time.
Quite, yeah. It's one of the fastest evolutions, and then reverse evolutions that I think has been documented. But yeah, it's just nobody would even know it's out there. It's just a tiny little fish. Once in a while, they'll wash up because after they mate, they usually die. And you can find their little, but they're so small, people don't even notice they're there. I found a bunch washed up one time, and that made me curious. Like, well, what is this thing, and why are there so many washed up? Is the lake, poisoned or something?
Yeah.
But it's completely natural, and they're fascinating little fish because the male makes an actual nest under the water, and then the female lays eggs, and there's some really fun videos of them. But sometimes another female will come in to lay eggs, but then she'll like try to eat the eggs that are already there.
Oh.
And the male will chase her out, and it's just like, I'm the male, and no wonder he dies, because he must be very exhausted after going through all that. But it's just like all this is happening right outside here, and everybody, we know about the salmon, but not the stickleback, because they don't do anything for us. Again, it's that whole what's the point of it? We don't eat it. They don't do anything. So
that's a shame, isn't it? Yeah, that science favors things that benefit us, and that there's all this amazing stuff to be investigated. I guess it gives scope for, like you said, like there used to be this unexplored world, and people would discover new places and new things, and it was this big sort of wild frontier. And now there is its own wild frontier, really, isn't there? When you just have to hang out with the less charismatic creatures.
No, definitely. It's like, like I like that part of being an explorer in your own city, or like the backyard or whatever, because it's like there was the other day I was on a walk around the lake, and there were just tons of these little fish just swimming all over, and everybody just walks by it. I'm like, but look at all these fish. What are they? I don't know what they are. I'm gonna take a video and find out. But or when there's like all these, we have these black dancer caddisflies. And people just think they're swarms of flies, but they're these beautiful, they have these lacy black wings and these really long antennae. And if you watch them, like I take videos every year of them with my phone in slow motion. And they're called the Black Dancers, and whoever named them did well, because they look
That's a
like
romantic name.
ballerinas. They're just so beautiful, and every year I'm like, look at all these, and people just walk right through them. And
that's something I love about this community, the nature community, the nature journaling community, that you can have these conversations and be like, yeah, something amazing, while everyone else is just going doing the shopping or whatever. The appreciation is there. I'm interested to talk about you. There's a quote from you in the book, and it says, I learned to pay attention when crows gather, because they often lead me to bald eagles and barred owls. And I'm so interested in this some species are indicators of other things,
Mhm.
and the crows are good for making a ruckus and letting you know where something interesting might be. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's it's one of my favorite, like, parlor tricks, like, you can really impress people. Because like, if you're outside just paying attention enough,
Mm,
you learn the baseline, like, what's normal? Like, this is how a
yes.
crow acts, this is how the coots act, this is how the ducks over here act. And so whenever they're acting a little bit different or making a weird call, or like when all the coots line up along the lake's edge, I have a pretty good idea that there's an otter nearby. Because otherwise,
Mm,
nothing distracts them from, or if they're like diving really fast, there's probably a bald eagle above them. And so just being out, like nothing, you don't have to like be like with your notebook in hand, like, okay, this thing's doing this, but just
yes.
like observing and doing it often throughout the year, you get to learn that baseline. And yeah, once you learn that baseline, then you can really impress people. It's
Let me
like,
find
oh,
something
listen, I think
wonderful.
there's, yeah, like the crows are, they're investigating something over there. Let's go see what it is. Oh, look, there's a dead bird or a dead fish on the lake's edge. Or, oh, they're all clustered around that tree. I bet there's an eagle in there. And people are like, no way. Like, yeah, see, there it is.
Yes, I love that.
So I mean, it's not complicated. I mean, it's pretty
Mm,
simple. You just once you learn what the normal is, you can
yeah.
find out what's not normal.
Yeah, we have some birds here called noisy miners, and their name is very indicative of their behavior because they all come together and they're and if you that's sort of their alarm call together. They sort of telling you something's going on here, and it's really
Mhm.
fun. You can sometimes find a snake. They might be alarming about a snake, or sometimes you'll find um, a tawny frogmouth, which is this incredible bird that has these really big eyes, but it's camouflaged like a stick, and
Uh-huh.
and you often walk past them because they're so very camouflaged. But sometimes a noisy group of miners will tell you where they are.
It's very nice that they, help us find things that we wouldn't see otherwise, but I always thank them. Like, "Thank you, crows."
Yeah, I love that. One of the coolest passages in the book is your description of watching a dragonfly emerge from and transform into its adult form. And do you know, I really think one of the most fascinating and also horrifying things I've ever sort of heard about in nature is the larvae of a dragonfly. And I remember the first time I saw it in a book, and again, it was like this moment, like, hang on, are you for real? I'd love for you to talk a bit about dragonflies, odonata, and predation, and watching this dragonfly emerge. This group is astonishing.
I have a not so secret fascination with carnage. So
Kind
I'm
of.
like, oh, dragonflies are total carnage.
Yes, yes.
The larvae are like you said, they're so weird. They're just like
Yeah,
squat and they have these weird bulbous eyes, and the weirdest thing is their jaw, because it
yes,
looks like normal, like when you see them, but then when they see prey, it just shoots out like a trap door
yes.
sort of thing. And it's like these meat hooks at the ends of their jaw, and it just like grabs the thing and brings it back, and they just chomp down on it.
It's horrifying, but also, like, amazing.
It's amazing. I like you think about all the documentaries about cheetahs and lions and stuff, but
Yeah,
no, like somebody's got to do one on the dragonfly larva.
absolutely. It's like you said before about science fiction,
Yeah.
illustrators or something. It's like this disgusting grabbing arm thing that comes out but it's so cool. I love that you love that and that you've seen these creatures. And what about
It's like
the emerging
that.
dragonfly?
It's so weird. So it's hard to describe to people because they're familiar with like an egg hatching or a butterfly coming out of a chrysalis. But to describe the larva and the adult,
Mm.
like it doesn't sit there and it's like stew in a cocoon. It At some point in time, the adult dragonfly grows inside the larva. Like it doesn't have this
Wow.
transformation period. It just happens, and then by the time it's coming out of the water, the adult is already inside. It still has a larval form, but the adult's all squished up inside
It's
this little case.
amazing.
And it's just the weirdest thing. And it starts, and its back splits open. This is so sci-fi. And the adult like starts to like creep out of the back. Like it's like its back gets pulled out, and then its head pops out, and it's very slow motion. It doesn't happen
Yeah.
fast. And then it's like it's pulsating because it's starting to use fluid to pump up its adult body because it's been shrunken
Yeah.
down. And the wings start to, they're like all curled up like little brains.
Wow.
And then eventually like the whole body comes out of this. It's like a magic trick, you know, it's like this whole big body, and then slowly it starts to inflate, like it pulses. It's like a brain pulsing. And it's the adult dragonflies are usually just kind of like whitish or beige. They're not very colorful. And then slowly as they mature and harden, their skin hardens and they finally get their color. But it's just this like this dragonfly emerging. Oh, and it comes out at first. It comes out upside down. Like it comes, the back comes
Oh.
out, and then it flops over. Its head kind of flops over backwards, and then when it pulls its abdomen out, it like flops back up. It grabs onto the whatever it's, you know, the larva's been attached to. And
Amazing.
I made my pond in my backyard, and then they come out every year now. So I'm always out there like photographing them and chasing away the juncos, because the
Yeah.
juncos like to eat them because they're very soft when they first emerge.
Oh, yes.
So I go to war with the birds at that point.
Protect the dragonflies. It's quite a privilege to have seen that actual process, right?
Yeah, and I've seen it now in my pond, but I've seen the damselflies at the arboretum, because they would come out during the middle of the day, and they're much faster because they're small. But there would just be like 10 of them lined up on the stone wall, and just like when you get down and look at them up close, it's like that whole alien. I show people pictures of it, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Holy, what the heck is
Yeah.
that?"
Yeah. It's
like
like
it's
that
right
when
there. It's like
This
literally
is
right down there at your feet.
this is the thing. All these wild things that are going on that we don't know until we read a book like yours or start doing this. Start observing, start being curious and looking down instead of looking at our
Yeah.
phones.
Well, and get down. Like I have actual knee pads now because I spent so much
Oh,
time crawling
nice.
around. I started doing dock filing, so I go to a floating dock, and I lay down and hang over the edge to look for nudibranchs or whatever sea life is over there. And I kept getting such massively bruised knees. So now my new favorite tool is my knee pads.
That's cool. You've got the coolest job in the world, seriously. This conversation is reminding me of one day I went out and I was with my father, who he and I and my son, we go out into the backyard and we just look around and see what we can see. And one day we came across this little chrysalis. Well, we saw something shiny, and it was this chrysalis of a common crow butterfly, and it was metallic. It's gold and silver metallic. It's so beautiful, like a jewel. And I'd never seen one in the flesh before, and I snipped off the branch it was on and I took it inside so we could observe it. And then it took so long. I had it there and I'd look at it every day and I was thinking, oh, I'm a terrible person. I've altered this butterfly's life cycle. It's going to die. I was feeling really guilty about it. And then one day I came and I looked in the box and it had turned black. And again, I was devastated. Oh, I've killed this thing. And then I realized, no. It's black because the butterfly, it's no longer gold because the butterfly is coming. And the black was actually the wings that I could see, and the chrysalis was getting thinner, I guess, and I could see the patterns in through the chrysalis. And that moment, I know you've had this before, but that moment where you're just like, something incredible is happening right now. And I spent that entire day waiting, and I just knew it was coming. And so I spent the whole day photographing and drawing in my nature journal. It was one of the most exciting things I've ever seen. And then towards the end of the day, it was coming. It was real. And my family's racing around calling each other and come and see, it's coming. And then the butterfly slipped out, and it was, first of all, it was just so moving, and I've just felt so lucky to see this moment. And then the butterfly's wings, things I hadn't thought about before, but they were all, like you said, all shriveled, and I thought, oh, it's damaged. But then I watched it over the next few minutes, and like you said, pumped up
Yeah.
and the wings expanded, and then it was just this beautiful, perfect butterfly. And that process, that miracle moment, I felt so happy and excited to have seen it. It was one of the things I'll remember for the rest of my life. It was so special.
It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, those moments are they're magic. I mean, there's no
Magic.
science doesn't come into it. It's just
Yeah.
magic.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned that you have dabbled in nature journaling, and I'd love for you to talk about your experience with journaling and making art of nature, and even your experience of what you're creating now.
Um, so I was forced to become an artist because in landscape architecture school you have to draw and illustrate your designs. And I've always liked to draw. I just haven't ever been very good at it. And so I suffered through landscape architecture school. And then when I started writing my website, I'm like, okay, I should, work on my nature journal. And I wasn't ever very regular about it. I do a lot more photography. But then I started getting into the nudibranchs. So I started a nudibranch journal. I wanted to keep track of all the nudibranchs I'd seen and where I'd seen them and everything. So I started working on that. And then for my website, I was writing a lot, but I didn't always have photos of the things I wanted to write about. And so I was like, I'm just going to try drawing it. And so I started sketching and watercoloring and doing a bit more and more. And then my publisher saw some of the articles I've been writing, and she said, "You know what? That would make a really good book. And in fact, I want you to do the art for it too." I was like,
Yes.
"What?" Because I was just like dabbling, and I never even considered myself like an artist. So it's been an adventure in this book, but it's been so much fun because writing can get very tedious and challenging, but having
Yeah.
to like each chapter I research, I write, and then I get to do the art. And it's
Yes.
such a fun system to include the artwork in it.
Mm.
And of course, now that I have to do so much art, it's becoming a lot better. And so I've been able to play with it instead of just like drawing from a photo that I took.
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of compiling pictures together, and like I did a picture of an open book with plants growing out of it, and it's just been so much fun to, and now I'm
Yeah.
inspired more to do work on my nudibranch journal and um, start doing more and more. It's just that learning curve. Like once you get comfortable with
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
it's so scary to mess up in an actual book. Like so,
Yes.
so I'm learning now to just go with it and make the best of it, and it is
Mm.
what it is.
Do you feel like your writing is one layer, and then when you're investigating a creature with paintbrush and
Mhm.
paints, I'm wondering if you layer on another layer and learn something new about
Oh,
that creature.
always, yeah. There's so much. There was a book I read, Crow Planet by Landolin Haupt, and in it she talks about sketching a crow feather, or maybe it was a dead crow, and how much you can gain from it. And I always took that heart to heart.
Mm.
And yet every time I sketch something, even if it's something I'm really familiar with, a nudibranch, there's so much more I notice about it by having to sketch it that I wouldn't
Yeah.
notice just taking a photograph or even just studying it and hanging out with it for an hour.
Mm-mm.
But yeah, every time I sit down to actually draw it, and I noticed so many more details about it, and like, oh, there's these weird veins. Oh, they like you can see that's body. It's like organs through the body, and I was like, the color is weird. How come the color looks like this on this one, and this one it's actually like pinkish, and I wonder why that is. And yeah, there's just it's one of the best tools to actually like learning more about an individual species or um, organism. Yeah, it's yeah, like with a microscope and flashlight. That's a sketchbook or watercolor, however you want to do it.
Yeah.
I do watercolor, but yeah, that's a really amazing tool.
Mm-mm. So in the book, you talked about watching a spider web when you were 7 years old, and you described it to your mother as a miracle. And your mum had the typical grown up response to say, well, it's just a spider. And so we're, like we said in the beginning, we're all born with this incredible fascination. And then something happens over time, and we lose that sense of wonder. And clearly you never lost it. And I'm wondering about how you maintained it, how we can maintain it as we go older, and also, are you actively doing things with your own daughter to help her not lose that sense of wonder? I'm thinking about that, how we retain it.
it's so hard because society is so unforgiving. And if you are going to go crawl around in the mud looking for slime mold, or if you're going to like spend an hour looking at a fly on, poo, people aren't going to want to hang out with you. And I mean, I speak from experience. Like they just want to go to the bar and hang out, and I'm like, but how about if we go next door to the cemetery and look at slime? I mean, look at lichens instead. But it's hard. It's hard to retain it because I definitely went through a period, in my teens when I was like, nature birding? No, I don't do birding. I don't know what that bird is. What are you talking about? But for me, it's like it's always been my refuge because I get a sensory overload. I get really stressed, and like the human world causes me a lot of stress, a lot of grief, whether it's the noise or just people and interactions. And so that's just like what I fall back to. It's just my default now. Well, it always has been, but it's like there's a tree, there's a forest. Like I gotta go out. I gotta get away from like the cars and the streets and everything. And so for me, it was like it's pretty much like life-saving. I mean, I have to. But yeah, like for my daughter, I definitely take her. She gets bored easily because she's 9.
Yes.
But she loves what I love, so she finds fascination. She stands up for the bugs like at school when they're at the park. She's like, "Don't step on the spider. No, here, let's put it over there." So she's like a nature defender, and yeah. So I mean, I know we talk a lot about like liking what you like and not caring what other people say, and but it's the world's harsh, so it's hard to be the weirdo.
I love though that now that we're connected with the internet, we have all these different ways of communicating. You can find other weirdos very easily.
Yeah, that's until I got onto Twitter, I didn't know hardly any other weirdos, and now I have a bunch of invertebrate weirdos that we text all the time. It's like, I saw this really cool nudibranch, you won't believe it. And then they get as excited as you do, so it's great. Yeah. Like there's other weirdos out there.
Yeah, totally. Finding community makes all the difference, and to have people who love what you love, no matter how esoteric and slimy or small or whatever, there's someone else out there who you can talk to, and that's really cool.
And it's nice having written the book because I hear from people, like even when I'm out looking for nudibranchs, like this person is like, "Are you Kelly Brenner?" I'm like,
"No."
Yes. Like, I read your book, I loved it. I'm like, how did you know who I was?
That is amazing.
But it's nice. Like a lot of people will say, "Oh, I didn't even know about tardigrades or slime molds, but now I really love them. They're awesome."
Yeah. Oh, in the book you mention, and it struck me because of an experience I had, but you mentioned tidiness in managed spaces, and it struck me. I remembered this phrase because of something that had happened to me recently. I was out nature journaling, and I had this idea that I was going to do the daily walk that I do, which is a local walk near my house, and it had a lot of flowers coming up, and I was going to nature journal this whole route and all the flowers that I saw. And I started, and then I had to come home, and then I thought I'll do it the next day. And I went the next day, and the council had come and flattened it. They'd mowed my flowers down. And I had this moment of like, no, we need to let the flowers grow. And I'm wondering for you about, you have this sort of landscape architecture lens, and I'm wondering what your thoughts on managed spaces and how to make spaces more friendly for biodiversity, and whether we need to be a bit more untidy in our cities and that sort of idea.
I always tell people the best thing you can do is to be a lazy gardener. Because leaves are perfect habitat for so many overwintering invertebrates and soil invertebrates. Pesticides are terrible. And like just like letting your garden be a little bit wild. Don't mow it all the time. Let the flowers and the weeds grow. Let the backyard, be a little bit wild and disorganized, because that's the best habitat.
Yes.
And I know we need space for, like people to have picnics or play frisbee, and that's fine. Um, but there's so many other spaces, like all those goose pooped areas that people don't hang out with. We just like that vista of the lake that we could easily, plant a ground cover or something like that
Mm.
instead. And then it wouldn't need to be mowed. And I don't know why cities are so obsessed with mowing and leaf blowing and then mowing some more. Because it just takes, I mean, for one, it's noisy. Nobody wants to listen to that. For two, it's wholly unnecessary and uses so many resources,
Yes.
people time, and our natural resources. And I'm like, it's so much easier and so much cheaper to just let things be. We don't need to chip up all the leaves that we rake up. Um, I just, every time this time of the year, because it's autumn here, it's just like, stop blowing those leaves, stop mulching everything, just stop. You're
Yes.
killing everything. Don't rake the moss off the roof. Just let it grow. It's not hurting anything. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to find that balance because we also have invasive species that have to
Yes.
be managed. Otherwise, they get out of
Yes.
control, like blackberries and reed canary grass and whatnot. Um, and so it's a fine balance. But there's so many ways that the cities could save time and money
Yes.
by re-landscaping areas or just letting certain areas be. Let them grow with weeds. Let them grow with the wildflowers. Yeah, I see that on UK, like the
Mm.
Twitter people always posting about how they mow the verges and destroy all the. It's a really important bee habitat and
Yes.
invertebrate habitat, and it's wholly unnecessary. It's not like it's going to grow up high enough to obstruct the driver's view of their flowers.
Yes.
But people just have, for some reason, been trained to think that that is messy and it's untidy, and it just shows that it's not being taken care of. So it's hard, and it's a long process to convince people that, hey, the leaves in the yard are actually good. I mean, it's fun. It's better than looking at a mud pit this time of the year.
Yeah.
And so I've got signs up all over my yard that says pollinator habitat, no pesticides. This is a habitat. Like I have a certified landscape habitat.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've got signs up all over the place so people
Mm.
know. And my neighbors all like, oh, okay.
That's wonderful to let people know that you can do it like this. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to have it manicured. Just speaking now, it reminds me of this neighbor we used to have when I was younger, and he had a deciduous tree right in the middle of his front lawn. And every day he would go out there and like sweep up all the leaves, and I was thinking, what are you doing? You're wasting energy. Not just wasting energy, but like you're clearing away habitat. But like, why are you doing that? Your time could be better spent.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot of psychological study behind why we
Mm.
have that obsession with lawns and stuff, but um, I won't go into that. But yeah, it's just this weird obsession with like
Mm.
pristine lawns. My neighbor across the street has the same way. Nothing must lay on the lawn, and it must be trimmed. Even now in winter time, she has it mowed once a week.
It's
Like
wild,
it's
isn't
not growing.
it? Yeah, it's like people fear being judged, for the inside of their home. We like to have our homes tidy. Maybe that extends to the lawn. They think they'll be judged or something. I don't know. But I,
It's
I
just
love that you.
yeah, it's easier. You can be lazy, and it's really good for habitat. You're saving the
Yeah.
wild bees by letting your leaves there. Just let them lie. I mean, if they're in the storm drain, of course, rake them out. But if
Yes.
they're just and you can rake them into the edges too. You can rake them into the flower beds.
Yes.
It's really good for the flower beds because it helps retain moisture throughout the year, and then it also protects it from frost,
Mm.
the flowers and stuff. So it's actually really good. It's beneficial to leave the leaves and weeds and like the seeds. Don't deadhead at the end of the year. Let the seeds,
Yes.
because now my yard's full of sparrows who are all eating all the goldenrod seeds, and like I don't have any feeders up, but I still have lots of birds in the yard because I just let it go wild.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In fact, here in Australia, bird feeders are not a thing. Well, some people do, obviously, but I find from conversing with people in North America that bird feeders are very common. And
Mm-hmm.
here, maybe it's more common to plant a garden that
Mm,
attracts birds. And I think that that's more, uh, in my worldview, like the more we can do that, the better than
Yeah.
putting out some seed that may or may not be there next time because you go on holiday or whatever the thing
Yeah,
is.
well, and not only that, but the feeders are horrible at spreading disease.
Mm,
There's always big outbreaks, especially on the West Coast here, of from bird feeders, and we know we're supposed to clean them, but people don't clean them as often as they
yeah.
should,
Yes.
or as well as they should. So, yeah, I mean, it's easy, it's cheap thrills to feed the birds with a
Mm,
bird feeder, and it's much harder work to plant all the native plants and wait for them
yes.
to grow. But it's much better for the birds, and it's not only the birds, because if you plant a plant, you're going to also benefit the bees and the flies and all the other
Yes.
invertebrates that hide in it. And so it's like it's so much better to plant native plants and
Yes.
have a garden with water source and all that stuff. Yeah.
Mm-mm. I love that your final chapter was about how the reader can bring this into their own lives. And I think this is a really important step. And you beautifully detail all the different things that people can do to begin to become a backyard naturalist, become an urban naturalist. And I wonder if you could just speak a little on that about what next? What can people do to start opening their eyes and bringing this into their lives?
What I like best about being a naturalist is that you don't have to have a degree. There's no gatekeeping. There's nothing preventing you from going outside. Anybody can do it. You don't have to have any special tools. Like I said, my favorite tools are a hand lens and a mic and a flashlight. So it's not like you even need any sort of fancy tools. And so it's open to anybody. You can and you don't have to be out into the wilderness. You can be out in a backyard or in the city looking at a sidewalk. I mean, anywhere you're going to find nature. Um, and and I always go back to Sherlock Holmes. Like just observing and noticing, not just like that you're walking down the street and not getting hit by a car, but notice like get down and you notice the ants that are having
Yes.
a war on the sidewalk, or noticing the different kinds of bark on a tree, or when the leaves come out on your backyard tree. Um, it's all about observation and teaching yourself to really look and see, and then have that curiosity. It's like, okay, well, there's a tree in my front yard, but what kind is it? And then you figure out what kind it is, and then you can figure out, you're like, well, when did the leaves fall? What eats it? What's made the holes in the leaves? And there's just an endless number of questions, and it's so easy now to find the answers because,
Mm.
I mean, there's tons of books for one, and then there's so much access now directly to scientists, like on Twitter or Instagram, and so many of them will just answer your question. Like I'll find a weird insect in my backyard and I'll say, anybody know what this is? And then
Yeah.
10 people say, oh, it's this thing. And then there's like things like Bug Guide, which you can put up an insect and just say, I don't know what this is, and an expert will identify it, sometimes within like 10 minutes. And so it's easy now. I mean, it's easy to be a naturalist and be connected and just get outside and observe and everything. So yeah, my next book is goes further into that. It's going to be a collection of 20 naturalist activities.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and a lot of them are like science techniques, but all of them are very simple, like with household materials or things you don't need a whole lot of tools for. The only thing that comes up that's a bit more expensive is a microscope. But yeah, so it's going to be a whole collection of, and hopefully things that will be, relevant throughout the entire world, not just Seattle. So like things like how to find tardigrades.
Yes.
So I'm excited. Yeah, it's going to be fun to get that out.
Oh, I can't wait for that. And congratulations on Nature Obscura. It's an amazing book and I thoroughly recommend it. It's such a good one.
Thank you. I'm so happy.
Kelly, thank you for being here with me. It's been amazing to dig into all of this and to chat about the wonders that can be found really close to home. Thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Kelly. After reading Nature Obscura, I was so inspired to go out and lie in the grass and watch and listen and experience all the things around me in my backyard. I love that Kelly spends so much time investigating the micro worlds within her city that she invested in some knee pads to protect her overworked knees. This made me smile so much. If you want to read Kelly's book, you can buy a signed copy directly from her website, and the link is in the show notes for this episode. I highly recommend this book, and it will definitely spark you to get out and crawl around on the ground or on your own roof looking for tardigrades. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.